Data cleaning, or as it's sometimes called, data wrangling, in Excel is a necessary skill for you to have if you want to up your data analysis game and really unleash the power of Excel to analyze your business data. This video is the fourth in a series of videos where I show you how to wrangle your data, clean your data in such a way that it then becomes useful. It becomes amenable to the advanced analytics techniques like market basket analysis and k-means clustering that I teach in other tutorials on my channel. The subject of this particular video is how you can group data using VLOOKUPs and pivot tables, and then join that back in to a non-group collection of data that then allows you to conduct more powerful analyses. So let's go ahead and flip over to Excel and let me show you what I mean. What you can see on the screen now is the Excel workbook associated with this video. If you're interested in getting this file, you can check down below the video in the description for this particular tutorial, and there'll be a link to a GitHub where you can download this file. And where we ended up last time at the end of video number 3 was working with these two particular columns of data right here, title and title VLOOKUP. And the purpose of video number 3 was to say, okay, we extracted the individual titles, Mr. James Brown, Mrs. Joe Smith, so on and so forth. And what we found was there were some rare titles. So if I scroll down, you can see here the title of Dawn, which is a honorific of nobility at the time that the Titanic sailed. And what we saw was a lot of these titles had very few passengers associated with them. So there were a few counts of Dawn, for example. So it made more sense to map those rare titles to more common titles. So for example, Dawns are adult males, generally speaking, so we map them to the title of Mr. And what we also saw in the last video was we had one incident of a mismapping. So the mapping made an assumption that if you had the title of doctor, DR, that you were a male, because at the time of the Titanic, doctors were overwhelmingly male. But what we saw in our data was something really cool. We saw a female with the title of doctor, and she got mismapped from doctor to Mr. So we can fix that pretty easily. So all we need to do is go over to column E here and click on the filter. And let's just go ahead and filter down to the females because we know we mismapped a female title. And we can see all the females here. And if we go to title VLOOKUP, we can then say, look at that. We've got Mrs., which is female, Miss, which is female, and Mr., which is not. So we just uncheck these guys and we filter down to this particular row of data. Now, if I scroll over a little bit, what you can see here is the name of this particular passenger, Dr. Alice Leader. She's obviously female because her name is traditionally female as Alice, and also she's explicitly marked as female in the data. And what we know from looking at her name, and this is a specific name formatting convention in this particular data set, is her surname. Dr. Alice's surname before she got married, her last name was Farnham, which meant that she changed it from Farnham, to Leader, which implies in the data that she's married. So that's a reasonable assumption for us to make. So what we can do is we can change the mismap title in this particular column, title VLOOKUP, and we can change it from Mr. to Mrs. based on what we know regarding the naming conventions used in the data. So I hit enter, and we've now mapped her correctly to the appropriate title. And I'll clear the filters here. And now we're back to our original 891 rows of data. Now in this video, what we're going to take a look at is column I, or the ticket column. And just looking at it, what you can see overwhelmingly is that this column isn't numeric, because obviously you've got various different types of ticket conventions. You have PC 17599, you've got A/5 21171, and then you've got pure numerics. What this tells us is we should treat column I, the ticket column, as being categories, that the individual ticket numbers are not in fact numeric, they're alphanumeric, and they're categorical. So one of the things that we do when we're trying to clean and wrangle our data to do advanced analytics is when we have a situation like this where we have categories, which these ticket numbers can be thought of, we should take a look at their frequency counts. That's one of the first things that we do to understand what's going on with the data. And the easiest way to do that is to just fire up a pivot table. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to throw up a pivot table here. So I'll just go up to Insert, over to Pivot Table, Insert a pivot table, and I'm just going to go ahead and put it in a new worksheet. And what you can see here is an empty pivot table. And what we're interested in is taking a look at the frequency counts of each individual ticket value or each category. So what we can do here is drag ticket down to rows, and you can see all the ticket numbers here. And then if I drag ticket down to the values, then you can see here I get the count of ticket. Let me go ahead and just zoom in on that a little bit so you can see a little bit better. And the first thing that jumps out at you is this row right here. The ticket with the identifier of 1601 occurred 7 times in the data. Now notice that this is quite a bit different than what we think of in the modern era. So for example, in the United States anyway, when you fly as a group on a commercial airline, you typically have an individual ticket number for each passenger. And then of course, each individual ticket number gets like a seat assignment on the airplane. But notice how that's different in the Titanic data. What we see here are obviously groups of folks, because here's one here with an incident of 2, a count of 2 tickets, that it seems like there are groups. So a group of people all share the same ticket number in the data. And we can confirm this pretty easily by going up here. So we'll go to sort options here, and let's go ahead and do descending by count of ticket. Click OK. And you can see here quite clearly, yes, there are many, many groups of people all sharing ticket numbers in the data. That makes things immensely interesting. That allows us to group the data and understand maybe the characteristics of these groups, and then we can then map that back to the individual rows. So for example, we can say this particular passenger traveled with a group of, let's say, 7 people total. 2 of them had master titles, 3 of them had miss titles, and then 1 had Mr. and 1 had Mrs., let's say, something like that. That's very easy to do in a pivot table and then join up to our previous transactional data or individual row data using a VLOOKUP. And let me show you how you can do that. So what we're going to do here is we're going to keep the pivot table the way it is, but what we're going to do is we're going to drag the title VLOOKUP column down to the column section of the pivot table. And look at that. See, now we can see the folks that have the ticket number of CA2343. There were 7 of them. There was 1 master, 3 miss, and 3 misters in this particular group. Now that's going to be potentially very interesting from a data analysis perspective. So this is data that we want to join up to our original data set that we saw in the other worksheet. But we've got a problem here. By default, for whatever reason, even when you're doing counts, if you've got an empty cell here, by default, Excel doesn't put a 0 in there, but that's what we need because we're going to use these as numeric columns. So that's easy to fix. So all you do is just right click in the column area here and then go to the pivot table options in the context menu here. Go ahead and click it. And then what we want to do here is we want to say, hey, for empty cells, show the value of 0. Oop, 0, okay. Click OK, and now we have a full table of data. Now, what I'm going to show you here is the way I do things. What I'm about to demonstrate here can be done in multiple ways in Excel, and I am not proposing that my way that I'm going to demonstrate is the best way. It's just the way I do it. It's quick and it's easy, and this is how I work with data in Excel. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and grab all of these row labels here, column labels, and then I'm going to go ahead and go down and grab all of the data. So I've got all of the numeric data, including the column names here. And all I'm going to do is hit Control-C to copy it. And you can see here I've got everything copied. And now I'm going to go back to my original worksheet here, and I'm going to go ahead and insert this data over in column W, and I'm going to put it in W1. Okay, and now here's the key thing. I want to copy the values because I don't really need the pivot table anymore. I just need the actual raw data. So all I can do here is just right click on cell W1 and then select values here. When I do that, boom, and I get some values. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this data here as part of a VLOOKUP to then copy over all of these values into columns into my table, which allows me to then characterize each individual passenger on the Titanic vis-a-vis their ticket group. I'm going to be in Q1 here, cell Q1, and I'm going to create a new column on this table called master count. I'm just going to hit enter, and I get a new column. And what I'm going to use here is the mighty VLOOKUP function to join up this data here by ticket, each one of these rows of data by ticket here. So for example, if I have 7 passengers that all have the same ticket number, I'm going to copy the appropriate values over here 7 times. And that allows me to characterize the group that the individual passenger was traveling with. VLOOKUP, and what we're interested in is column I2. that is, or cell I2, I should say, because that is the ticket number. You can see right here. So VLOOKUP, which I covered in the last video, we need what value we're going to go grab and then go to the table over to the right and look up the value. So we say, okay, I2. And then we need to tell VLOOKUP where is all the data. And it happens to be in $W, $2. And you can see here, now I'm highlighting this particular cell. Let me scroll over just so you can see a little bit better. And then all the way through $AB, $682. Now, what we'll notice is that the value of master, how many individual passengers with the title of master are in the ticket group, is in column 2 here, because this is column 1, column 2, 3, so on and so forth. So we put in 2 for the lookup value, the lookup column. And then lastly, we're going to want an exact match on the ticket number. So we put false here and we close it off with a parenthesis. Now, if I scroll down, what you can see here is that we have all of the data highlighted here in this particular VLOOKUP definition. That's exactly what we want. So if I go back up to the top here and I hit enter, boom. Notice now I'm filling out the master count. And you can see right here in row 9, this particular passenger had the title of master. And in the ticket group he was traveling with, because masters are boys, there's just one. All right, now that we have that, let's go ahead and do the same thing for miscount. And it's basically the same thing. So I can literally just go over here, Control C, just copy that code here, go over here, cut and paste. But now I want column 3, right? Because the miss values are in the third column here of this pinkish table of data. So I'll just go over here, hit 3. And what I'm going to do now is fill out the column for the Mr. count, fill out the column for the Mrs. count, and one for the ticket count. I'm not going to make you watch me do that. So what I'll do is I'll just jump cut to the final result. All right, now you see the final result of the work. You can see I have my master count, miss count, Mr. count, Mrs. count, and ticket count for each individual ticket group. And this is awesome. Just to make sure that this data is going to be maximally useful, what I want to do is replace all the VLOOKUP here with just the actual raw values. So what I'm going to do is highlight these 5 cells, and then I'm going to hit Control Shift down arrow, highlight them all, Control C, and then I'm going to right click, and then I'm going to paste values. What this does is this is going to overwrite the VLOOKUP function and just paste in the resultant values, and it'll be a lot easier for me to use over time. Okay, and if I just click on the cells here, you can see that the VLOOKUP formulas are gone. And what that means is I don't need this anymore. I can just go ahead and delete all that. So this is commonly what I do. I use a lot of like scratch work areas, either in worksheets or temporary tables in worksheets in my Excel data cleaning, and it works out real great. Let's go ahead and get rid of sheet 1 because we don't need this bad boy anymore. It's served its purpose. What we can do is analyze this data, all this Titanic data, in a new and interesting way with these new columns, with these new features that we've added. And not surprisingly, one of the easiest ways to do that is use with the pivot table. So let's go ahead and just insert another pivot table. So I'll just do a pivot table, and I'm going to go ahead and throw this in a new worksheet just for grinsies. Voila, we've got a pivot table. Let me zoom in a little bit so you can see a little bit better. Now here's what we're going to do. We're going to use these new columns that we just added, these new features, to investigate a hypothesis regarding the survival rates. Because the point of this data set is for each row of a passenger in the Titanic data set, we have a column that indicates whether or not they survived or perished. And what we're interested in, obviously, with this particular data set is identifying any sort of characteristics that are highly associated with survival. So now that we know that there were groups of people traveling with the same ticket number, we can make an assumption that most of those folks were related somehow. And let's say that we want to investigate the survival rates by title, given that there were a Mr. and a Mrs. in each particular ticket group. So what we can do is say, all right, that's pretty easy to do. First thing we're going to do is drag down our Mr. count to the filters and Mrs. count to the filters. This will allow us to filter down the data to where there's both a Mr. and a Mrs. And then let's go ahead and put title VLOOKUP in the rows. And let's go ahead and, for grinsies, let's just go ahead and drop new P class in there as well. And then we say, okay, we've got masters in first, second, and third, so on and so forth. And then lastly, what we can do is drag new survived to the columns, and then drag new survived to the values. And then lastly, as we've seen several times in this video series, we'll transform the count of new survived to percentage of row totals, because that's a little bit more intuitive to work with. And boom, this This is where things get awesome. Okay, check this out. So notice, right now we're using all of the data, but we can filter things down. So what we can say is, look, I'm only interested in rows where the Mr. count was 1 or higher. So I get rid of the zeros here. And where the Mrs. count was 1 or higher, do this, boom. As my dad would say, now we're cooking with gas. Check this out. So first up, the first thing we notice is masters, which are, as we saw in previous videos, male children, boys. And what we can see here is that masters that were traveling in first class in a ticket group where there was both a Mr. and a Mrs. present, at least one of each, they all survived. 100% survived. But notice this, there were no masters in second class that were traveling in a ticket group with both a Mr. and a Mrs. Interesting. And then lastly, notice this, not good. If you were a boy traveling in third class and your ticket group had at least one Mr. and at least one Mrs., you only survived based on the data 10% of the time. It's unfortunate, but it's also a highly interesting, highly powerful analytical result. And then you can see similarly for Miss. So if you have the title of Miss, which denotes either a girl, a female child, or an unmarried adult woman, 100% survival in ticket groups with both Mr. and Mrs., 0% in third class. Again, unfortunate, but highly, highly interesting from an analytical perspective. And I won't drain the rest of this table. You can go ahead and take a look at it at your leisure. If you download this particular file from the GitHub, you'll see this particular tab here with this particular pivot table in it. There you have it. Using pivot tables and VLOOKUP to augment your data to allow you to conduct super powerful analyses. If you're interested in up-leveling your Excel data analysis game, be sure to check out these videos on my channel to learn more about what Excel can do for you and your business data. If you found this content useful, if you liked it, if you would really help me out with the YouTube algorithm, I would really appreciate it. Just go ahead and press that like button, and that'll tell the YouTube algorithm that this is good content. Thank you for watching, and until next time, please stay healthy, and I wish you very happy data sleuthing.